This has been an extremely challenging budget to write.
Things are getting worse for many in our community as uncertainty increases together with ever-rising prices. But the millionaire tax finally offers Washington a real opportunity towards a brighter future.
We are here to test you, to see if you truly believe that your power supersedes the will of the people.
They want to cheat, they have cheated, and their policy is so bad that the only way they can get elected is to cheat.
I was pretty horrified, actually.
The cookware industry is trying to sell lead in your cookware.
It is crunch time in Olympia. With less than 2 weeks left in this shortened legislative session, several big bills are still up in the air. In this week's episode of In Session, Balancing the Budget, 2 competing proposals are on the table to help dig the state out of a $2 billion budget gap. Also ahead, the controversial income tax proposal draws powerful reaction from the public. The latest on the so-called millionaire's tax. Plus, President Trump wants to end mail-in voting and change the rules on how to register. Washington Secretary of State says that should be a concern for all Americans. Thanks for joining us. I'm Joyce Taylor. Our Olympia Bureau Chief Drew Mickelson is at the Capitol now. And Drew, let's just start with the budget.
Yeah, Joyce, as you know, we've talked a lot about that income tax, the millionaire's tax, as some are referring to it here. And that would be the most historic piece of legislation passed this year. But first, lawmakers do have to deal with the current budget. They've got a $2 billion hole, and they need to deal with that first. And that is what's happening right now. And that could impact parents of the state's youngest residents in childcare and those heading into kindergarten. These new budget proposals coming from House and Senate Democrats are a little different, but there is a lot of overlap. Legislators have that approximately $2 billion hole in the current 2-year budget. The Democratic proposals include reductions to child care and the transition to kindergarten program, along with higher education. There is not a call for any new taxes in this current budget cycle, but they're counting on that income tax to help pay some bills come 2029. Both proposals also call for tapping into the state's emergency account, the so-called rainy day fund.
The cost of doing business as a state is primarily an employer, and costs of providing, good jobs for state workers with healthcare benefits continues to rise, just as employers all over the state have found those costs to continue to rise. So costs are rising while our incoming tax revenue is relatively flat.
Our state has always had a bit of sensitivity to sort of boom and bust cycles because of our revenue structure. The millionaire's tax would be a significant step towards smoothing that out.
We are a society that is still experiencing wild income and wealth inequality, and cost of living is high. And we are passing important programs at the state of Washington to directly meet those needs of our constituents, and surprise, they're getting utilized. That's certainly true for childcare. That's true for healthcare. And I want to, emphasize again what Chair Robinson said when we opened up. The implications of H.R. 1, as well as the tariffs, cannot be underscored enough. We are a trade-driven state. There's a reason why we played in the conversations legally about the tariffs. They really impact our economy. So all of that is context for what we're working with here.
Republicans, as you can imagine, have lots of issues with these proposals. They don't like the idea of tapping the emergency savings account. They don't like the idea of taking funds from other areas of state government to balance these books. They just would like to see this budget balanced with cuts and finding some more efficiencies in state government.
It relies on a lot of one-time dollars to pay for ongoing cost. For example, it takes about 50% of the state's rainy day fund and uses that to bridge the gap of this current budget, and then it hopes and it prays that the economy will get a little better, or perhaps that the income tax will come in and save the day in future years.
And that's a gamble, in your opinion. That's too many wishes.
It's absolutely a gamble, and it seems to be kind of history with this particular Democrat legislature. And not only does it take half of the rainy day fund, but it takes about $375 million from the public works account. It takes another $350-ish million from the capital budget. to fund the operating budget. So it does a lot of shell games to move money around to make the budget work this year, and then just hope and pray that it'll work in the future years.
So now the budget is going through the process. It's had its hearings. It'll have debates on both the floor of the House and the Senate, and expectedly will be voted off the floors. And then the two parties, or the two sides, the House and the Senate, will come together and work out a deal that everyone can agree on, or at least enough people can agree on to get it passed. And that will have to happen by March 12th. That's the last day of the legislative session. Joyce?
And then, Drew, of course, one of the things that could fill the budget gap in the future would be the so-called millionaire's tax. Is that a done deal?
No, and that's one of the hopes. You heard the Republican mention that this is a hope and a wish by lawmakers. It's not a done deal yet. It has not passed officially here, but it's definitely making progress. The state wouldn't collect anything on it until 2029, so it is looked at as a longer-term budget fix. It has the support of the governor and the House leadership and the Senate leadership. They're still working on the details, though, to really secure enough votes to get it passed. And that could be a tight vote. This latest proposal calls for a new income tax on households that make more than $1 million a year. And those residents would pay a 9.9% levy on earnings above $1 million. It calls for the elimination of the sales tax on hygiene items, and diapers has now been added to that list. There also are tax breaks for small business and low-income families. Taxpayers lined up to be heard on this. First, we'll hear from those who like the idea, including someone benefiting from the kind of tax credits this law would expand.
I am very grateful for this credit and use mine to pay my phone bill for a year in advance for my husband and I. It takes one monthly payment off my list, and I know it's taken care of so that doctors and schools and my children can always reach me.
Things are getting worse for many in our community as uncertainty increases together with ever-rising prices. But the millionaire tax finally offers Washington a real opportunity towards a brighter future.
Our tax code is broken. It's a century-old artifact that has failed to provide a stable foundation for you all to build a state that Washingtonians deserve.
Caregivers and vulnerable residents don't have the option to leave. It's time to fix our upside-down tax code and protect the people who truly cannot afford these cuts.
Now, you heard her mention affording to leave the state, and that has come up. There are business owners and individuals who said, if you pass this, I'm moving out of the state of Washington. Other concerns we heard from the opponents, they fear it'll be expanded to be an income tax on everyone. They say it's not going to help affordability problems in the state, and there are some who wonder whether it's constitutional at all.
If this legislature wants a progressive income tax, it should send a constitutional amendment to the voters and not pretend the Constitution isn't clear unless every legislator who votes for this bill is prepared to explain why taxpayers don't have a property right to their own income.
We are not here today to beg you or convince you not to pass this bill. We are here to test you, to see if you truly believe that your power supersedes the will of the people.
This state needs healthy and growing small and medium businesses. Companies must grow to hire workers, and they must invest in order to grow. Money directed away from investment will impact job growth.
Since a lot of the people here are actually speaking on behalf of education, how about a lesson that I learned when I was in elementary school? If you give a mouse a cookie, he will want a glass of milk. If you give them a millionaire tax, they will want it on 500,000, 100,000, and then the rest of us.
There's no reason at all to start a business in Washington State anymore. Our hard work goes to wasted spending. My company is actively shifting our operations away from the state of Washington, and I'll leave as soon as I possibly can.
So, Drew, there was some controversy over people signing up to testify. What was that about?
Yeah, this has happened a couple of times this session, we understand, and it's actually triggered an investigation here at the Capitol. So when they have a public hearing like this, you can sign up to testify, and then they'll call on you if they have enough time. You can also sign up just to have your opinion heard. It's kind of a popularity poll. You can say pro or con. Yes, I want you to know I'm opposing this, or I like this idea. Well, they had more than 100,000 people sign up for this particular bill. Obviously, it's one a lot of people want to be heard on. But we were told that there were 19,000 cases of duplicate names being on there, so names were appearing twice. And then there were about 200 people who were fraudulently signed in. Some had no intention of having their opinions heard. They were on the list. There were others who opposed the bill, but they were written down as being in favor of it. So the state wants to get to the bottom of this. We spoke with the Senate Majority Leader and the Speaker of the House about this. They said those numbers really don't carry a lot of weight, but they do want to make sure it doesn't happen again.
When the system is misused in the way that it's alleged to have been misused in this situation, it creates a challenge for us. And I don't think we're at all at an kind of end point of our investigation of what happened in this situation. But that's something that we will likely do over the interim, see if there are tweaks to the system that we need to do to make sure that the sign-ins are as accurate as possible. But the one thing we want to make sure we're counterbalancing against, we don't want to exclude Washingtonians from being able to sign in and to be able to testify on legislation. That's been a huge benefit and potentially the only benefit any of us has seen from COVID.
I think, as the speaker said, there is a real tension between trying to lock that down and make sure that it's exactly the person who said that they were signing in, and really wanting to have a very low barrier way for people in the public to be able to participate in our process. And I agree that the main antidote to this is just to take with a grain of salt the numbers. Right, because they're not intended to have the same level of security as we have with our really outstanding vote-by-mail system, for example, which is not subject to the same kind of fraud or abuse, and they don't need to be, as long as you take it with that caveat that that's not the system that we built, because we want it to be easy for people to access.
Those Democratic leaders noted that there are safeguards in place as one of those CAPTCHA things to make sure you're not a robot. But obviously someone has found their way around that. So as part of the investigation, they're also going to look at a way to make sure this can't happen again and you can't get around that safeguard. Joyce?
It's fascinating, though. All right, Drew, let's turn now to something President Trump said during his State of the Union address, that he wants to get rid of vote by mail and require proof of citizenship for voters. It's raising serious concerns across the country and here in Washington.
Yeah, Washington's Secretary of State, he heads up the elections across the state, and he called it horrifying when he heard those words. He was actually in Washington, D.C. for the State of the Union address. He was already there to speak out against the Save America Act, which he says would impact federal and potentially even local elections. He says it would increase costs, make it harder for people to cast votes, and he thinks it's just not necessary.
And perhaps most importantly, I'm asking you to approve the Save America Act.
President Donald Trump wants Congress to require proof of citizenship to register to vote and to show IDs on Election Day. He also would like to end vote-by-mail elections.
The cheating is rampant in our elections. It's rampant. It's very simple. All voters must show voter ID.
I was pretty horrified, actually.
Washington State Secretary of State Steve Hobbs was inside the House of Representatives chamber during the State of the Union address as a guest of U.S. Senator Maria Cantwell. Hobbs says the Save America Act would only disenfranchise voters and cause costly logistical problems for counties. Everyone in the state would have to re-register. He wishes the president would focus more on cybersecurity risks than making claims Democrats cheat at elections.
That's horrifying to even say that, because now you're setting up expectations that if the party they're directing the attack to wins, then obviously they're cheating.
In the state of Washington, to register, potential voters must now check a box declaring they are citizens. According to the Secretary of State's office, since 1982, Washington has had 15 cases of a non-citizen voting.
It is certainly a potential for problem, and I believe it's a bigger problem than the Secretary of State is acknowledging.
State Republican Party Chair Jim Walsh backed an initiative last year to require written proof of citizenship to register to vote. That campaign failed to gather enough signatures, but Walsh says he'll try again this year.
What we're asking for is a higher level of security, of an ID check when you're registering to vote, not when you're voting. We're trying to make the reform at the point of registration, and we believe that would be enough to clean up the voter rolls and keep them current.
Secretary Hobbs says if this were to pass Congress, and that is not a sure thing at this point, but if it passes, he says the state of Washington will sue to try to get it overturned. Joyce?
And if it survives that legal battle, how would that impact elections here in Washington?
We asked the Secretary of State there about that. He said it would make things a little complicated, but in theory, this would only impact the federal elections, so presidential and congressional races But if you wanted to vote for those candidates in the state of Washington, you would have to re-register, and then you'd have to show that proof of citizenship, and then you maybe wouldn't have to do that for the state election, but then you're talking about having 2 different ballots, 2 different systems. So the secretary said they'd probably combine the ballots, which would mean everyone would have to re-register if you want to vote on either a local or a federal race. So it would create quite a long line, some are fearing, not only on election day, but also just to register.
Yeah, and that's just for Washington, never mind the rest of the country. Drew, thank you. And next on In Session, a years-long effort to lower the state's DUI threshold fails yet again. How pushback from the hospitality industry may have killed the bill. Plus,
I am grateful to all the members of this committee and all the members of the House.
the Washington House Majority Leader noticeably intoxicated during a hearing at the Capitol. His apology is coming up on In Session. Welcome back to In Session, your weekly recap of what's happening in our state legislature. I'm Joyce Taylor. The implementation of a law to limit how much lead can be in pots and pans could be delayed again. A King 5 investigation found dangerously high levels of lead were blamed for illnesses in children in King County. That report caught the attention of legislators who passed the strictest regulations on lead in cookware in the country. But last year, legislators delayed implementing them and increased the levels considered acceptable. And there's another bill in Olympia this year to do that again. The sponsor of the original legislation says that is irresponsible.
The people who sell you pots and pans and tell you cook for your children at home are literally trying to put in place a standard that will cause lead poisoning in our children.
A lobbyist for the cookware industry says manufacturers want to ensure their products are safe, but more time is needed to establish testing policies. The Department of Ecology, the agency in charge of enforcement, also supports delaying implementation. And one bill closely watched this session aimed to prevent drunk driving and DUI-related deaths. But efforts to lower the threshold for drunk driving fell short. The bill would have lowered the state's blood alcohol limit from 0.08 to 0.05. It passed the Senate last week. However, it failed to pass out of the House Community Safety Committee. Utah is the only state with a 0.05 limit. Drew Mickelson joining us once again from the state capitol with more on this. So, Drew, this is the 4th year in a row the issue has failed. Why is that?
Well, the simple answer is just there's not enough support. The votes simply aren't there. But this is a tricky one. This is one of the few bills that comes up here where it isn't equally divided amongst party lines. There are people who are kind of mixed on this. You mentioned Utah. The initial numbers when Utah switched a few years back peaked a little bit, but that was because, some say, it was right after COVID, and that's when they were seeing more drunk driving around the country. So those numbers have come down in Utah since then, but some people feel like, wow, we don't want to be number 2 if Utah's not doing the greatest job with it. So that's still being looked at, but there was a pretty consistent lobby against this bill from beer and wine makers as well as the hospitality industry. They want the roads safe, but what they're worried about is that their employees might be held liable because if they serve someone at 0.05, it might be harder to determine if they're impaired. So that seems to be the biggest hurdle that this has, but I know the legislators who are behind it are really passionate about it, and they'll be bringing it back next year.
And then something came up this past week that didn't have anything to do with state policies. A state lawmaker had to apologize for drinking alcohol before a legislative hearing. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this was really the big surprise of this legislation. I think a lot of people didn't see this one coming, and it's the House Majority Leader who we're talking about, Representative Joe Fitzgibbon. He's been elected in that position by his peers, and he had to issue this very public apology. Representative Fitzgibbon, a Democrat from West Seattle, says he was under the influence of alcohol during a committee meeting hearing on Wednesday afternoon, and that committee was voting on the current budget. In a written statement, Fitzgibbon said, quote, "I deeply regret and apologize for the fact that I consumed alcohol before the work of the Appropriations Committee was completed on Wednesday, and the result was obvious. This was a serious mistake, for many reasons. Fellow legislators got suspicious when at the end of the hearing on Wednesday, Fitzgibbon made a speech about that state budget.
We're in a particularly hard time right now for many reasons, but more than anything because of the expenses that we have been sent our way from Washington, D.C.
Fitzgibbon says he learned a painful and embarrassing lesson this past week. Speaker of the House Lori Jenkins says the actions did not meet the standards of professionalism expected, but she stands with the representative as he takes whatever steps he needs for his well-being. We have not heard if he might be reprimanded in any way at this point. We have not heard of any ethics complaints have been filed against him, but it's something that a lot of people here obviously were talking about and we're pretty shocked about.
All right, Drew, thank you. And still to come, we're looking ahead to what's happening next week during the session. Welcome back. Well, with less than 2 weeks left in the legislative session, it's now a race to get bills passed in Olympia. So, Drew, what are you keeping an eye on?
Well, there's so much we'll be watching. You know, we've got that deadline coming, March 12th. That's when they have to get their work done here. The short-term budget filling the state's $2 billion hole may actually be the easiest of the legislators' to-do list items at this point. That income tax will be getting a lot more scrutiny, a lot more fight as we head into the final days of the session. And we're still not sure where Governor Ferguson is going to land on all of this. And he has come out saying he supports this idea of taxing those who make more than $1 million a year. But he says taking that historic step, Washington, remember, has never had an income tax. He says that can only happen with significant tax cuts elsewhere. And at last check, there wasn't enough tax relief. He suggested eliminating the sales tax on diapers, which lawmakers did add to their proposal. But he wanted more, including creating 5 tax-free holidays in the state. And that's not something we've seen Democrats incorporate yet. But there are still lots of details to be worked out between now and March 12th.
And then what about the bills regarding federal immigration enforcement?
Those are also bills that seem to be destined to pass. They're moving along pretty quickly. Earlier in the session, we talked about those flock cameras. There's a lot of pressure on legislators to put some regulations in place. Those right now are being used without many rules, and some people are worried about those, the data getting into the hands of federal investigators. Also, that bill regarding mask use by federal investigators, that seems to be another one that is likely to pass. And for our longtime in-session viewers, we wanted to update people about the state shark bill. We talked about that earlier. Last week, we delivered the sad news that it was not going to pass this year, but we did get word that it'll be back next year. This is the blunt-nosed 6-gill shark. It's commonly found in Puget Sound, and there is a pretty big group, mainly some third graders, who want this bill passed. They just ran out of time to do it this year, but I spoke with Christine Reeves, the representative behind it. She's feeling better about it. This was the first year that bill got introduced, and we always hear that it's almost impossible to get a bill passed the first time out, even if you're talking about the state shark. Chris.
All right, Drew Mickelson reporting for us in Olympia. Thank you. And we'll have more on all of these topics on the next In Session. To see all of our coverage so far, just text the word session to 206-448-4545, and we'll send you a link. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you again next week.